Good evening, or good morning, or wherever anybody is, to you wherever you are. I realized I didn't say very much about myself last week, so I'm just a short introduction where I come into this all from. I met Lama Zopa Rinpoche in 1985, so 35 years ago. I was a born-again Christian at the time and was really wanting to be like Christ. I wanted to figure out some way to be like that. And I wasn't finding any method in Christianity for that. I'd been looking at different contemplative paths within that, but I just wasn't finding any roadmaps to how to develop oneself. And I had a boyfriend who happened to be a student of Lama Geshe's and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's, who I met about a month after I read the chapter on the need for a teacher in Ram Dass's Journey of Awakening. I started praying to God to meet my teacher. And a month later, I started this relationship with someone who was a student of Lama Geshe's and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's. And that was 1984. So in 1985, I went to France to do a 2-week course with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Lam Rim course. And the thing that hooked me the most were these teachings on bodhicitta, because suddenly there was this idea of the bodhisattva and someone who devotes their life to helping others and wants to become enlightened so that they can limitlessly, spontaneously, effortlessly, perfectly benefit others, all in the spirit of love. And for me, I just felt like I knew it. I knew there was something, there must have been something out there. So I was pretty excited to meet Lama Zopa Rinpoche and meet these teachings. And I spent a couple more years trying different Buddhist paths. I looked into Zen and Vipassana courses, and in 1987, I took the Kopan course, the very famous month-long course in Nepal, and I decided that was going to be my decision time. I was either going to take Lama Zopa Rinpoche as my teacher, and that was going to be my path, or I needed to find something else. But I didn't want to keep surfing around looking, and the Kopan course was it. I mean, at the end of that, I was sold, and I asked Rinpoche for my life advice, and he gave me that, and I've been in ever since, just in various capacities, doing retreats and pilgrimage and taking teachings and being of service at Land of Medicine Buddha Center in California. And then, of course, I worked with Mary Colony for quite a few years, a decade or so, at the FPMT Education Services. And now I live my life in a retreat lifestyle. So there's so much material here to delve into deeply, and it never quite feels enough. It always feels like you're just beginning to scratch the surface. And so yeah, it can take, I would say, many lifetimes to go deeply into this, to actually attain enlightenment. And I have finally come to terms with that. I wanted it to be in one lifetime, but I think it might take a little longer than that. And I'm okay with that. Anyway, this is Inside Out, Tapping Our Potential, which is a clever way of introducing the course Developing Bodhichitta, which is module 10 in Discovering Buddhism. And last week, I just kind of gave a little bit of an overview of where bodhicitta fits into the path. So bodhicitta means the mind of enlightenment, and it's a determination to attain the state of full awakening or Buddhahood for the purpose of benefiting others. So it has those two components. And the main wish is that we could benefit others. And then in order to do that, we have to attain enlightenment. So that's the mind of bodhicitta. And to develop that mind is quite deep. I mean, the way that Tibetan Buddhism is laid out, Stephen Batchelor calls it a spiritual technology. And I would agree with that. It's a way, step by step by step, to train our minds to develop certain realizations and awakenings and tap into our propensities to be able to benefit others. So inside out is bursting our self bubble, being able to expand outwards infinitely in order to benefit others. And without bodhicitta, we can't really fulfill our purpose in life. So according to Buddhism anyway, our actual destiny, our purpose is to become a fully awakened being, to become, to have all the qualities that we need to be able to help others, all the knowledge, limitless compassion, limitless love, and actually able to manifest in limitless bodies to be able to benefit others. And the only way to actualize that is with this mind of bodhicitta, is with a mind of great love and great compassion, and especially what's called the special brave attitude, which is the mind that takes responsibility to do that. I'm going to do that. Even if it's by myself alone, that's my promise and that's my pledge. And this particular course is how do we get from I just want to be happy to I'm going to do whatever it takes to free every single living being on this planet and beyond, those seen and unseen, those I've met and I haven't met. How do I get from here to there? And so we started last week with the mind of equanimity and the need to break down our bias, our way of putting people in boxes of friend, enemy, and stranger. And hopefully you had a chance to work with that material a little bit. The main point of that meditation is just to start to even things out and to see how our relationships are really always in flux, even in the course of just one lifetime, let alone many lifetimes. And the friends can become enemies and the enemies can become strangers and the strangers become lovers and lovers become enemies. And it just is always constantly in flux. And so through the course of that meditation, we just eventually train our minds to not hold so tightly close those who we see as helpful or who like us, and not to push quite so strongly and permanently away those who we think might harm us. And for myself and the mindfulness exercise that we did last week, I think one of the things I also noticed is that in my radar of when I encounter another, I'll just say human being in this case, I'm kind of always looking for a clue if I'm safe or I'm not safe around that person. And how simple a smile is in terms of assuring me that I'm going to be okay around this other person. And so one of the things that I just noticed this week is my wish to make other people comfortable, and how simple a smile can communicate to a person in front of you that I'm not going to harm you. I'm not here to harm you. I'm a friend. You're safe here. So anyway, that was just something that I got out of this last week, but I'm also preparing for this week. So I had another hit, which I'll tell you about later. Anyway, so bodhicitta is in the Lam Rim, which is known as the graduated path to enlightenment, step-by-step ways to develop our mind to the state of Buddhahood. And it assumes that you've had some exposure to the steps that come before in the Lam Rim. So bodhicitta is quite far advanced in the stages of the path to enlightenment. It's what's called the path of the highest capable being. Capable meaning capable of caring how many and for how long, and what's the level of your motivation. And in the first parts of the Lam Rim are things like precious human rebirth. We start to realize the very special and unique blend of circumstances that we have in our lives to be able to develop ourselves spiritually, and that doesn't happen randomly. You only get a life with this kind of leisure and this kind of exposure and this kind of opportunity, really because you've made prayers to receive a life like this. You've actually consciously somehow come into this life and met spiritual teachings, especially these Buddhist teachings that can awaken our minds. Like somehow we've had some exposure to them in the past. Otherwise, we couldn't have managed to have this unbelievable opportunity. You know, that we could die at any time, that at the death time, if we haven't put enough positive energy in our mind stream, just by the nature of the mind being so crazy and up and down all around, there's no telling where we could take rebirth if we're not careful about how we create imprints in our mind. And so, you know, the possible suffering is very, very intense, and the possible happiness is very, very intense. And then there's refuge and karma, the law of cause and effect. And then that's all part of the lower capable being. And then in the middle capable being, we look at the whole story of the world and samsara and suffering and what causes suffering and how do we get out of suffering. And it's the 12 dependent links, it's the Four Noble Truths, it's developing this motivation of what's called the renunciation, or the mind of definite emergence, as Alex Berzin calls it. And bodhicitta is founded on the mind of renunciation, this mind of definite emergence, that somehow we have understood that we can't keep just trying to move pieces around the chessboard. It's a bigger issue than that. We have to change the game completely. And the only way we can possibly do that is by penetrating the nature of reality, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And otherwise, we're just going to suffer forever. As long as we're trapped by our own self-consciousness and belief in a self, and belief in a permanent self, and in an independent self, and a separate self, and we're going to relate to the world in such a way that's going to keep us trapped. And renunciation is you penetrate the truth of what it feels like to be trapped and bound to suffer so deeply that you are going to get out. You have renunciation. And it's on the basis of that, then we turn our minds to others and realize that if this is true for us, it's true for everybody else around us. And how could we think just of ourselves when there's so many others around us? And these others are not so other, as we talked a little bit last week. But that's really the theme for this week, which is our connection to others and how we can really deepen that experience through this one method called the 7-point cause and effect instruction for developing the mind of bodhicitta. But it's done on the basis of having done some of the work of these other stages of the path, and in particular that you've developed this mind of renunciation, of wanting to get out, of realizing that the game is broken and we need to change the whole game. We can't just move things around. And there's a great analogy, a visual for this situation and trying to understand it is it's a person burdened. Their back is bare, and they've got this huge thorny giant bush of thorns, and we're all of us are like this. We're carrying that burden on our back, and as the thorns are digging into our back, and there's all these open wounds on this thorny bush, that's considered what's called the suffering of pain. That's like our direct physical, emotional pain, the things that we usually identify with as suffering in the world, poverty or illness or you just injure your body in some way, or you're physically hurting, or you're emotionally in pain, just the very gross pain that we all think of when we think of suffering in this world. That's the thorns digging into the back. That's the suffering of pain. And then there's another kind of suffering, which is known as the suffering of change, which is what we tend to think of as happiness, like, a good relationship, or having resources or having strength or youth or vitality, or, you know, everything that we associate with being in a good position, what we think of as happiness and joy. And in Buddhism, it's said that, you know, if something is truly a source of happiness, then by definition, more of whatever that is, there should be more happiness. So if I'm in a relationship and it brings me happiness to be with that person, then the more and the more and the more and the more all the time I'm with that person, I should just only and always be happier and happier and happier. But it doesn't always really happen. Or food, you know, if you're hungry and you have the opportunity to eat, in that moment, that food is a source of happiness. But it's really just changing from the suffering of starvation to the suffering of being too full, because if you kept eating, that source of happiness would become a source of suffering. So that's kind of in the analogy of carrying this burden of this giant thorny bush. It's like you've got all these thorns digging into the back, and you've got all these open wounds, and you just kind of shift the burden. And for a minute, the thorns they're taken out of the sores in your back, and you have a little bit of relief. And that relief is the suffering of change, like, oh my gosh, I have some relief. But eventually the thorns are going to work their way back into your back, and you'll be back into the suffering of pain. And so you can see that the problem is that the fact that we're even carrying this burden at all, that's what's called all-pervasive compounded suffering. That's the real suffering that we're trying to free ourselves and everybody from. Just the fact that we're carrying a burden, a thorny burden on our back. Just if we could just take that whole thing off, that would be freedom from suffering and the potential to suffer. And, you know, in our world, one way you can think of it is, you know, like places like Flint, Michigan, where children and adults, people are getting really sick from the contamination of the water. And it would be like trying to address, you know, the lead poisoning and the cancer and the things that are happening from people drinking all this polluted water, but only focusing on that. I mean, if you're not focusing on getting to the source of what's causing those really horrible effects, you're never going to finish cleaning up the problem. You have to go and clean up the water. I mean, the fact that they're drinking contaminated water, the fact that the water is contaminated, that's the real problem. That's what we have to fix. And so, you know, in this world of our life, in the suffering of samsara, what we have to fix is being under the control of karma and ignorance and delusions, and especially ignorance. Because ignorance is the misapprehension. It's an active misknowing of how things exist and how we exist. Because of that, we put imprints on our mind that perpetuate that wrong view and that sense of isolation and never quite being at ease or in harmony with the way things are, because we're not. We believe that we're separate and independent. And because of that, we push and we pull. And we do everything in relation to this self that we believe in. And it keeps us very, very frozen and locked in. And we see everything in terms of helping and harming and wanting and pushing and like we're in competition. And we never can quite feel fulfilled. So that's, you know, the all-pervasive compounding is this recipe that's at work right now in our lives, that we have to overcome that in order to free everything up, and not only for ourselves, but for everyone. So when we look at bodhicitta, one of the things that we start to have to really break into, and this is in this method that we're going to work on this week, the 7-point cause and effect, we really have to break our sense of permanence and just this life and frozen relationships and the way that we move in life. We seem very, if we talk about impermanence intellectually, we can understand that, but we don't live that way. We're always shocked when something breaks, something doesn't work out, or something changes in our body or in our circumstance, and yet that's really how things are. Things are impermanent. They're in a flow. And this method to develop bodhicitta, which is based on the mind of renunciation, which is understanding we need to change the game. It's called the 6 causes and 1 effect, and we do it on the basis of equanimity, which we did last week. So we kind of have already loosened up our boxes of how we relate to others, and that's more fluid than we might have thought initially with friend, enemy, and stranger. And then we're all the same. We all want happiness. We don't want suffering. We all share that in common, and we just don't know what we're doing. So we keep making these mistakes, but there's no reason to keep us frozen in these boxes or these relationships. That's always going to be changing. And on the basis of that, the 6 causes and 1 effect, the very first meditation is considered to be one of the hardest realizations to generate in the entire Lam Rim. That and seeing the Guru as a, and that realization is recognizing that all sentient beings have been our mother. And it requires, obviously, some sense of, I've had more than one life. So if you're still grappling with whether there are past and future lives, that'll be a topic at some point you're going to really need to penetrate and get into. We're going to talk about it a little tonight. But it's hard to recognize all beings as your mother if you've never, ever considered that you might have had a life before this one. And the idea is as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says in his, which I wanted to make sure I mention. So in the homework or one of the handouts, I mentioned this book by Lama Zopa Rinpoche called Bodhichitta. And it's a much more fleshed out version of the small book by Riba Rinpoche that we're reading for this course. And one of the things that Lama Zopa Rinpoche says in that book about this meditation of recognizing all beings as having mother is, we're not, this isn't a fantasy. It's not just a trick that we're using to trick our mind into having compassion. It's actually true. It's not just, so taking that into consideration, how do we get from here, our fixated little permanent life, to the idea of this flow of lives without any beginning, and having had a mother in the majority of those lives. And if there's lives without any beginning, and you can't count how many sentient beings there are, but there's more lives than there are sentient beings, then naturally, just by math, everyone's at least been our mother, and at least been our mother not once, but probably countless times, just human form and animal form. And so you can see the crux of that meditation is we really have to break this dam. We have like a dam that of permanence and singularity and independence. And behind that dam, it's like behind that dam is a whole ocean of love and compassion and connection. And a lot of these meditations are putting cracks in that dam. And eventually, we just keep chipping away, chipping away, and chipping away. And eventually that dam breaks, and all of that just floods our mind. And it just becomes who we are. And we can't imagine being any other way, because now we see what's true. We see how every single living being that we see and hear of and are exposed to in any kind of way has actually been as close to us as our mother of this life, has has given their actual body for us as a hotel for 9+ months while we develop. And they took care of us when we were completely vulnerable. I mean, just lying there as a baby, there's nothing you can do for yourself. You can't feed yourself, you can't clean yourself, you can't do anything. And our mother did those things for us, and not just once, but the chances are pretty good if she was our mother in this life, she's probably done it before. And how are we to say how many times or how many lives, and who could we actually look at and say, you've never been my mother, with 100% confidence? So that first meditation, which is what we're going to explore tonight, is really quite pivotal. But it's also, you need to combine it with the next one in the lineup of 6, which is recalling the kindness, what it actually means for a person to be our mother. And some people have difficult relationships with their mothers, or some people are adopted. And I think with this meditation, as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, you can also change the mother. The mother could be your father, the mother could be your adopted person or whoever raised you. Just someone who it's easy for you to feel just a debt of gratitude that they really gave you the platform for your life. They really, somebody taught us how to walk and how to talk and how to eat and how to take care of ourselves and protected ourselves. I have a niece and a nephew that are they're not quite 2 yet. And I'm just reminded how dangerous it is for little children. Danger is everywhere. There's so many ways that they could hurt themselves. And the mother and the father, in this case, they're always checking. They're always looking. There's always an antenna up, to make sure that they're okay, to try to keep them protected. And, so if you have trouble with your actual birth mother, there's ways around it. You can use other people that are easier to relate to, because the truth is, if you think of beginningless lives and beginningless time, then we've had every kind of relationship with every kind of being. There's no relationship we haven't had. So whoever you feel like you can really get into this meditation with, or get into that kind of sense of gratitude for, whoever you can do that with, that's the person who you should use primarily for this meditation. Although at some point, you will have to work with your birth mother, because we can't have bodhicitta if we leave even one sentient being out. One sentient being that we leave out of our wish to benefit or our wish to help, or that feeling of connection or gratitude, that puts a limitation on our mind. And if, technically what bodhicitta does, there's no way for enlightenment without bodhicitta. There's the 2 wings of the bird. There's what's called wisdom, which is the understanding of emptiness and the nature of reality and, dependent arising and how things exist and how they don't exist. And then there's what's called the method wing, which is all, the love and the compassion and the bodhicitta. And each of those has to be developed to their full extent. And full extent means not even one is left out. Not even one is left out. And when not even one is left out, and your mind is fully imbued with that mind of bodhicitta combined with emptiness, it's said to remove what are called the obscurations to omniscience. And only love and compassion and bodhicitta can remove those obscurations. Wisdom is not sufficient. So love is really what fully activates our potential. Emptiness clears away obstacles, but love and compassion are what really fully activate all the qualities of a Buddha, of Buddhahood. So anyway, back to the 7-point cause and effect. So, on the basis of equanimity, there's recognizing that all beings have at one point been our mother. There's recalling their kindness, what it meant for them to be our mother. And even if your relationship with your mother is difficult, just the mere fact of having a body is really enough. That she nourished you in her own body for 9 months. I mean, we're incredibly grateful when we travel or we go somewhere and someone lets us stay on their couch or in their guest bedroom for a couple of nights and offers us a few meals. And yet our mother gave us 9 months in her own body so that we could have form, so that we could have this body that by some miracle now we have this chance to develop spiritually in a way that most people on this planet never even hear the words Buddhahood or enlightenment or even think of something like that as possible. But we have this body now, and we've all the circumstances of our life, we have, faculties that work, and we have intelligence, and we have some kind of spiritual faith, and somehow we've met those teachings. And it said, with all these perfect conditions, this body being primarily one of them, liberation is like right in the palm of our hand. All we have to do is take it. I mean, we've never been this close. That's all we have to do. And the fact that we have this physical basis is really from our mother, just from enduring the 9 months of pregnancy, not aborting us and giving birth to us, and making sure in whatever way, even if she couldn't do it herself, that we were taken care of, that we were protected, that we were fed, that we were clothed, that we were educated. However that has happened, that brought us to where we are now. I mean, how do you repay that kindness? So that's the third step. It's kind of a domino effect, really. If you get the first couple of meditations well, then the rest flows naturally. So if you have this sense of connection, but with your mother, and then you realize this flow of lives and beginningless and relationships, and you actually realize that all beings have had that same role, have taken care of us all in the same way. And then there's the recognition of their kindness. There's naturally the wish to repay their kindness. I mean, even marketing gets this, the free gift. If you get the free gift, you're kind of hooked to, the corporate America figured that out. So if we can really get that our mothers really gave us an unbelievable gift, then naturally there's the wish to do something in return, to repay that kindness in some way. And so we hold them with a mind of affection, a mind of love and endearment, wanting to, holding them close. This friend, enemy, and stranger, our friends were the people who helped us. And so we realized that our mother helped us the most, just by giving us this body, if nothing else. And so with that mind of affection, there's the wish for her to have happiness, at the very least, because of this unbelievable opportunity we have. We wish that she would have happiness. That's affectionate love. And then, because of this broken wheel, samsara, one of the words for samsara in Sanskrit is called dukkha, which actually means a broken wagon wheel. It's like the wagon wheel has come off its axis and it can never ride smoothly because of the broken wheel. It's always going to be this funky ride, this dukkha, because of this wheel that's off its axis. And so we realize that our mother can't really be happy. We can't be happy. Nobody can be happy as long as we're in this funky ride that's not really going right. It's like, so always Sangha Rinpoche said, when you go to the grocery store and the cart's got one of those bad wheels, and it just can really enjoy your shopping because this wheel is just not working properly. And that's how our life is if we're under the control of karma and ignorance and delusions. And so even though we want happiness for this person, our mother, we realize that you can't just keep shoving happiness into a broken system. It won't work. Happiness can't be experienced like that. You can't be happy with a funky grocery cart. So then there's compassion, the wish to remove all the suffering, all the things that are getting in the way of happiness being truly experienced and not being contaminated by the fact that it ends in suffering. And so there's this compassion. And then from that compassion comes this special brave attitude, the responsibility. This is my job. I mean, my mom gave me this. My job is to free her. I mean, I have liberation like right here. How can I just walk away and leave her to suffer forever? I mean, that's the choice. Am I going to help her, or I'm going to let her suffer forever alone? Like, how could I do that? So, special brave attitude, how am I going to do it? I mean, the analogy here is we're all drowning in a dark ocean. That's what it is to be a suffering sentient being. We're drowning in an ocean. And how can I, as a drowning person in the ocean, like at the Titanic, where it's sinking in the water, and we're all drowning in the freezing ocean in the dark, how am I supposed to save somebody else? I can't, I'm drowning. They can't hang on to me. I can't keep them afloat. I can't do it if I'm drowning in the water. So I have to get out of the water. I have to get out of the water, and I have to get a boat, and then I can help everybody. I can pick up everybody, and we can all get off this ocean and get to a whole different place. But it's not going to happen if I just remain an ordinary suffering sentient being with a limited view. I can't do it. So I have to, bodhicitta, I have to attain enlightenment so that I can free everybody, including myself. That is the 7-point cause and effect instruction. So we're going to meditate on all of that this week. I mean, you could spend decades on each of those 7 points. But I want to add one other piece to this, which is in the, I had mentioned that there's these 2 methods. You know, there's the 7-point cause and effect, which those are the points. And then there's this other method, which we'll review a little next week, called the exchanging self for others. And then in Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition, we blend them together. And then there's one point that's in the blended version that's not in either one explicitly, which is just the kindness of others in general. And so we're going to bring that into this meditation this week, because I think it's really powerful. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche does a really powerful way of diving into this. But basically, if you just, wherever you are right now, wherever you're sitting, if you're drinking water or tea or, you know, using this computer, or everything, every single object in just in your small room where you are now came about because of others. So, I think this is a wool scarf, right? So that came from sheep, and then there were people who sheared the sheep, and people who made the yarn, and somebody who wove it, and then somebody who marketed it, and someone who brought it in trucks, and then eventually it came to me. But there's countless beings just for this one object, for me to enjoy this one object, the storekeeper and the people who work in that store. And every single one of those people had a mother. They had a mother. That's how they came onto this planet. That's how this came to me, with just one object. And so you start to become aware of every single object in our life, in every single moment, everything that we enjoy, everything that we eat, the clothes we wear, the shelter that we use for survival. I mean, our transportation, there's not a single object that if you follow it back and back and back and back and back, doesn't represent more beings than we can count. You know, if you think of each of those beings and what it takes for that being to stay alive and live their life and have the thing that contributed to my having this object, just one object, you can see it just starts to expand and expand and expand and expand. And I tried once in a meditation to think of how could I live totally independently without relying on anybody? What would that look like? Like just to be completely independent. And I got to the point where I was naked in a forest trying to live on nuts and berries or something. And, you know, I was using the forest for my shelter. And I was like, okay, so, well, the problem there is, you know, probably the forest, the berries, at least birds probably ate berries or something. And in the bird poop, that's how that seed got there and how did the tree get there. And so I wasn't completely independent. And even if I was completely naked and I was trying to live off the land in such a way that I didn't think I was relying on hardly anybody, I still have the body, which came from my mother and my father. I mean, the only thing I bring to the whole equation is the mind. That's it. Everything else about our life, everything else in the form world comes because of countless other living beings, all of whom have mothers. And all of those mothers are in what I call the ocean of mothers. There's an ocean of mothers in this room right now that contribute to this moment happening where we have this class online. I mean, just, you know, even the computer and the software and the developers and the internet and the infrastructure and the electricity, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So there's that too. And when we realize that, it's kind of outrageous to think that really we have anything to do with anything. I mean, you know, even practicing generosity or doing anything that creates a good karmic condition for a good life, it completely relies on others. I mean, you can't get out of the equation of the fact that everything in our lives, especially every good thing in our lives, depends on these countless others. And they all have mothers. They wouldn't be happening without mothers. Even in the animal world, they have mothers. So this is the ocean of mothers. And that's the ocean of mothers and their support. And that sense of connection, affection, and almost like an indebtedness of gratitude, that's the real juice of how we get to bodhicitta in this method. You know, that emotional connection that we have and that actual connection that we have by our life. And then I want to just touch a little bit on this beginningless point. Because if you're a little exposed to the Mahayana, which is the great vehicle of Buddhism, you know, you read some of these sutras, you realize that all of the sutras are kind of mind-blowing. I mean, they're all, you know, the great trichilya cosm of the universe and billions and billions and billions and hundreds of millions of this and that and these beings and this. I mean, and I think the whole point of anything Mahayana is literally to blow our mind, like literally to just get out of this small, confined, limited perspective and just blow it open. Just blow it open. It's not that small. Nothing's that small. I think last week I might have mentioned His Holiness giggling a little bit after he mentioned, you know, seeing the world burn up. and that the only way I could understand that in my own mind was that it must have just such a big view. And he knows the solution to the whole problem, you know, the whole game can be changed. And His Holiness can see that. So he doesn't get so as bogged down in the in each story as we do. Like every story that we're in and that we read and that we see, every story feels so big. But if you had that view that His Holiness has, if you had that view of this, this whole world system, and the planet Earth is just a small part of that whole world system, but that takes eons of time. I mean, and a great eons of time, and an eon of time in Buddhism is, here's a mind blower, an eon of time in Buddhism, and not even a great eon, I think it's like an intermediate eon, is the time it takes for the lifespan of a human being to go from 80,000 years down to 10 and back up to 80,000 years. That's an intermediate eon. And there's 4 intermediate eons in an eon. I mean, we're in what's called the 100-year lifespan right now. It's a very specific point in time where we're just perfectly poised to receive the teachings, because there's just enough suffering and just happiness and just the right blend in our positions that we're each in, that we can receive the teachings and generate compassion and generate renunciation. But a lot of these other time periods, either there's just not enough suffering, so there doesn't seem any point to do any kind of spiritual practice, or the suffering is so intense, it would be like, living in the middle of the Syrian civil war. I mean, you don't have the space to develop a spiritual anything. You're just trying to survive, and you're not even sure for what. So, this idea of eons of time, and it takes so many eons of time for the world system to even form. Like there's a period where it's considered the formation period, which, I guess our scientists would say, since the Big Bang, right? I mean, in Buddhism, there's this formation period, and that takes a certain number of eons. And then there's the abiding. There's the abiding period, and then there's the degeneration eon, which is what we're in now as it starts to degenerate. And then that world system kind of eventually completely disappears. And then there's space for another eon. And that's just one world system. There's countless world systems. I mean, they go on and on and on and on. And, science is catching up. It's not, and now there must be a cause for the Big Bang. And there's more than just one galaxy. I mean, the universe used to be everything, but now there's more than one universe. So Buddhism says that. It just goes on and on and on. There's no end. There's no limit. And if we just try to imagine what it would be like to see that, to be out of just this one little tiny short life and see that whole evolution, that whole flow of being and all the different lives and all the different relationships and all the different things that happen. And, we don't stay on one planet. We go to different planets and different realms, and what that would be like to have that kind of mind, that helps in recognizing all sentient beings as having been our mother. We just have to break out of limitation and boundary. And once we break it open, then all the possibility and limitlessness and beginningless and endless, all those things become accessible. And in Buddhism, there's only one argument for beginningless lives. That's it. I mean, which is kind of amazing in Buddhism, because Buddhism has points and subpoints and counterpoints, but for establishing the continuity of lives, there's only one argument, and that is that every single effect, our mind, our continuum, is necessarily precipitated by a cause of a similar type. So like you're not going to get an orange tree from an apple seed. You have to have an orange seed for an orange tree, or an apple seed for an apple tree, or if you have something made of wood, it had to have kind of a continuity of wood that it always was sort of part of things that are of the same substance. I mean, you can have cooperative conditions like sun and water and heat and moisture and those things which help a seed to sprout and become what it's going to become. But the stuff itself that flips over into the effect has to be the same substance. It's called nyerlengigyu, the cause that's the stuff that flips over. And so for the mind, they say the mind is not caused by the physical. The mind does not have form. And so the body does not create the mind. The only thing that substantially creates the mind, because the brain does help the mind function in this human body in a particular way. I mean, that's not contradictory. It's sort of like electricity and light bulbs, right? I mean, you can have electricity flowing, but you might not see it without a light bulb. So you can have the continuity of mind, but the brain and the ability to speak and hear and all those things, there's this vessel that the mind can operate in so that it can be expressed in a particular way and it can interact in a particular way. But the very stuff of mind is only a previous moment of mind. That is the entire argument for past and future lives in Buddhism, is just that. And the best way to explore that and figure that out is in meditation, is really getting into the flow of your own mind and seeing, by seeing the flow of your own mind, starting to realize that prior to birth, prior to the womb, it doesn't really make logical sense that it was nothing. Nothing doesn't really make sense. I mean, nothing in the natural world does that. It's almost like it's a closed system where everything's just changing form, even the elements, in the way that the elements express themselves in trees and soil and the objects around us. I mean, those things, they don't disappear, they just change form and change expression. And even the body, I mean, the body, the mind leaves and the body dies and it goes to ash, and then the ash becomes part of the soil, and then it keeps going. I mean, nothing just ends, and nothing comes from nothing. I mean, nothing isn't anything. So nothing can come from nothing. Nothing isn't anything. So of course, things come from other things. Things come from a continuity before them, and the mind is no different. It just takes different forms like else in the natural world. So that's the argument for past and future lives. And you have to work with it if it's still, for some people it is a sticking point. It's not part of our culture. I think at the time when Lama Atisha taught this, in the 10th century, it was just considered obvious. People just took it for granted that, of course, we had past and future lives. Even in India now, it's not even, people don't even think about it. It's just assumed that everyone knows that. But in our culture, we're a little bit more obsessed with beginnings and the first, and trying to assess that. And so it's not really part of our way of thinking, the way that we're educated. But if you start to sort of think of this flow of existence, the mind just fits right into that river. And that's what we have to get into for this meditation. So there's a great quote that we're going to use, but I'm going to say it now just so you can think of it. It's actually for impermanence, but I really like it for this meditation as well. And it goes like this. The three realms are as impermanent as autumn clouds. Beings come and go. It is like watching a play. Beings' lives are as brief as lightning flashes in the sky and rush on like high mountain waterfalls. And if we can just imagine the idea of all of us just playing different characters, just playing different roles, our mother in all these different forms, all these different characters, and that I love the visual of our lives rushing on like a high mountain waterfall, all these little drops of water, like just getting, shot off the top and then falling down below, and all of the, the water is moving and changing as it's falling down, into the river, which goes to the ocean, which goes to the clouds, which comes to rain, which brings you back up to the top of the rivers, which comes to the waterfall, which brings you down, and it just keeps going like that. So a couple little things to help loosen it up a little bit. There's something called the world death clock. Did you know that almost 2 people a second die on the planet? So in less than a second, 2 people just died. 2 people, 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 2 people. It just keeps going like that. That's on the planet. That's how many people are going and going and going and going and going and going and going. Coming in at the moment is more than 3 births a second. So that many people are dying, and that many people are coming in, and that's how it's going all on the planet, all right in this time that we're sitting here. Every single second, more than 2 people die, and more than 3 people come in. And it's just, if we could even just see that, and that's just in a completely ordinary way on this planet, someone's keeping track. I don't know how they're doing it, but you can actually go on the internet and watch the world death clock. It's crazy. And you can watch the world birth clock. And every time it happens, the numbers flip over. It's so, it gives us a little bit better sense of, it's not just me in this short life that feels so permanent and so small and so solid. It's just, the whole thing is just this long, long, constant flow. So those are the things to get in touch with this week. So we're trying to get out from permanence to possibilities. That's part of our inside out, from get this concrete thing like this to just, it's constantly flowing. Life is constantly flowing. All these people are coming and going in and out of our lives. And because everybody's been everything, there's nobody more important than the person who gave us this body, our mother. So the homework for this week, because I'm going to do meditation after, but I want to get into all the explanation part. I don't know if you're familiar with this book. I think it's opposite on the thing, but it's called Are You My Mother? It's a Dr. Seuss book. So our mindfulness for this week is, are you my mother? Like everyone you see, just think to yourself for a second, are you my mother? And imagine that you actually know. Don't worry about if you have the realization. This isn't about that. This is just trying on what it might feel like to recognize, oh my God, this is my mother. This is my mother from another life. I just don't recognize her. That's really the awareness to try to cultivate, just to see how it affects our minds. Because the truth is, it's completely possible. It's actually likely. And there really isn't anyone who we can point to with 100% confidence and say, you definitely have never been my mother. We can't do that. We don't know. We really don't know. And the chances are higher that they have been, and as kind as hopefully our mother has been in this life. I have quite a stunning mother. I've been very lucky in this life. In fact, I had recommended a movie to my mother, which I thought was actually extremely entertaining. I gave it a 10 out of a 10. And she watched the movie and she got back to me the next day and she said, that was a terrible movie. And I asked her why. And she said, well, there's a point in the movie where the mother has to go and leave her daughter because the mother has a mission like for the world. And so she has to leave the daughter and she doesn't want to tell the daughter where she's going because she's afraid the daughter will follow her and it won't be safe. It wasn't even a huge part of the movie. My mom was so fixated on that. And she said, I would never leave you. I would never, ever leave you. I just wouldn't do that. So for me, that movie was just like, no, not happening. That's just not, I can't even imagine ever even thinking that way. So if you're fortunate and you have a mother, like I have a mother, you know, they did give up their lives. I mean, all they want is our happiness. If we're suffering, they're suffering. If we're happy, they're happy. And that's all that matters. I mean, that's all that they really even care about. And the idea that this is her first time at it, I don't think so. She's a pretty natural. So, especially in relationship to me. So it's not that big a stretch for me. So between our mothers of this life, who wasn't a mother in just this life, and all of the ocean of mothers that are supporting us in this very moment, which is another awareness to cultivate this week. What we're trying to do is just break down a sense of isolation. We are not alone. We are not isolated. All of these beings who are supporting us all the time, the only thing we bring to the party is our mind. Everything else comes from somebody else. And embracing the purpose of our lives, which is because we have this situation, really the purpose of our lives is to take this opportunity and free every single living being from every kind of suffering they have and place them in a happiness from which they will never fall. That's it. There's nothing else. I mean, it's suffer forever or that. And I mean, who wants to suffer forever? So that's a little bit about bodhicitta and the 6 causes and 1 effect method. So we're going to do this meditation, and I did have Mary upload your homework. So your homework is to do this meditation. Try to do it a couple times. And I just want to take a couple minutes. So the way we're going to do this meditation, I mean, equanimity, just that meditation, you could do that days and days and days and days for months and months and months. And you could see how it could start to impact your mind more and more. And then this recognizing all beings as your mother, you could do that meditation, for days and days and months, and see how that starts to affect your mind. And then recalling their kindness, and then automatically the wish to repay that kindness, and then affectionate love and compassion and the special brave attitude and bodhicitta. Each one of these meditations is super, super deep. And they're also dominoes for each other. Like there's some that just will happen automatically. You'll just flip into that mind because it just will happen naturally. Like when you remember someone's kindness, of course, you want to repay their kindness. You want to do them a favor back. If someone has you over for dinner, you feel you want to have them over for dinner. Like there's a little bit of I want to do something for them. They did something for me. So that just becomes very, very deep. So for this meditation, we're going to combine a couple. I find recognizing all beings as my mother more powerful when I also reflect on what the mother means to me and the kindness of that. So that's how we're going to do it this week. And when if you actually really want to develop bodhicitta on your own and really work with these meditations, the way that you do that is you would, you take all the points, like what all the, equanimity, and then the six causes and the 1 effective bodhicitta. And then you decide, okay, this week I'm going to go into recognizing all beings as my mother. So you remember equanimity, and then you go into that point deeply, and then you kind of come out and you just remind yourself what the other steps are, like how your mind, what's the journey you're going to take this imprint on eventually. You don't have to go deep into each point, but you sort of remember them until eventually you become really familiar and you've gone deeply into each one of these points, and they become kind of a certain song and a certain tone in your mind. And as you do the meditations, I mean, they're analytical. Like first you use your mind But as soon as you get a point, like if you reach a point where you are just overwhelmed by how kind your mother has been, like there's a very strong emotional resonance with something, then you just hold that as long as you can. You stay with that feeling in your mind as long as you can. And that's what actually starts to change the mind, is when you have, you do the analysis, but when you have like an aha moment, you stay with that as long as you can. And if you start to come out of it, if there was a phrase in your mind that got you there, you kind of recite that to yourself again, and you go back in. And eventually, these topics, the whole outline, and it becomes kind of like catching a wave, like surfing. You go in and you're going to ride the bodhicitta wave. I'm going to do the 7-point cause and effect bodhicitta wave. And so I'm going to play this song, I'm going to play these notes and these parts of the symphony, and oh, this one really hooked me. And then I go into that and I stay in that, and it starts to change my mind, and I have this resonance with it, and kind of finish the symphony out. And so each one of these, blocks becomes something that starts to very deeply change how we actually experience things, until it becomes so natural we can't imagine we could have ever thought any different way. Like, that's when you've had a real shift. Like, and as Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, we're not trying to play with our mind and create a fantasy and kind of brainwash ourselves. We're actually trying to get in touch with what's true, what's so. And so when you're also doing these meditations, if you have resistance and you have debate in your mind, don't worry. That's actually great. I mean, Nagarjuna said, one of the biggest qualities you can have is doubt, as long as you're willing to pursue the answer. So if you have a mind of resistance to something, like, forget the beginningless lives, I haven't lived all those lives, fine, let that mind come up. And then see if that's true. Like, does it really make sense? Like, debate with your own mind. Or take that and say, well, is that possible? That, that's how I got to the one with, well, there's no sentient being I could say for sure 100% you've never been my mother. Because I was trying, this one's been my mother, they've been my mother, and my mind was like, no, they haven't. How do you know that? So it's like, okay, can I say for sure they haven't? Could I say that for sure? And then that debating mind, that resisting mind, it gets stuck because it's just been confronted. So we're not trying to brainwash ourselves. We're trying to explore reality and see what we discover, see what makes the most sense. Because you can either infer things, you can use logic, which is what truth, past and future lives is about, is inference, is logic, until you develop single point of concentration. And then you can see your past lives directly, or there's certain things you can see yourself, like impermanence, you can see that. So that's just a little bit of how to work with these meditations over time. So we're going to do a short meditation. Which actually I meant to do at the beginning, but oh well. We launched right in. I did meditate before we started, so I hope I counted. Anyway, okay. So take a few deep breaths in and out. And then bringing to the space above us all of our teachers, all of our guides, and especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in the aspect of Thousand-Armed Chenrezig, a being of white light, whose nature is pure compassion, pure love. and imagining that we're going to do this meditation on recognizing the ocean of mothers that supports us on behalf of every single living being there is, to uplift the minds of all. And completely entrusting ourselves in refuge to all those holy beings who have reached enlightenment, have now come back to help us. We'll just chant Om Mani Padme Hum a few times and imagine that Guru Chen Rezig is present and blessing our minds to receive some insight in this meditation. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. Just being present with our body sitting in this place, the mind in a constant flow, the atoms of the body always moving, the blood always pulsing. Nothing standing still for even a second. And imagining there's no more belief in permanence. We appreciate the flow of mind even before this life, even before this body. Because any single moment of mind is preceded by another moment of mind. And if there's been even one life before this, there must have been a life before that, and before that, and before that. Could there be a beginning? And seeing in the space in front of us, those who we might consider friend, those who are close, those who are kind, those who like us, those who help us, those who might want to push away, enemies, who hold different views than us, who seem like they might threaten us or harm us, or maybe they have, and strangers. our ignorant disregard that doesn't even see them. And recalling how easily these relationships change with a word or a glance or a smile or a scowl, even just in this one life. Friend becomes enemy, enemy becomes stranger, stranger becomes lover, then enemy, friend, enemy, stranger. And seeing how these boxes don't apply. They're always moving, always changing. Even as our own body is always changing. Even as our own mind is always changing. And then right in front of us is our mother. The one who gave us this body. Try to picture her clearly. And recognize why she's called mother. She gave me this body for 9 months and then some. She gave me her own body so that I could develop, so that I could take birth. She became heavy. Her body became uncomfortable. She protected me when she moved. She ate certain things and didn't eat other things. She was only concerned that I be kept alive. And then at the time of birth, her whole body feeling like it's being split by a mountain. And she gave birth to me in a healthy body. And even though there was so much suffering in giving birth, she didn't even think about it. She was only happy to see that I was alive and well. I was completely vulnerable. I couldn't even move myself. She sheltered me. She bathed me. She cleaned me. She fed me. She protected me so that I survived. She taught me how to walk, how to talk, how to feed myself. She helped educate me, gave me so many meals, provided me shelter, set me up perfectly for this life that I have, that is so precious. As long as she is alive or has been alive, she always thought about me, was concerned if I was unhappy or sick, only wanted my well-being and my happiness, and did as much as she could within her means to help me, to support me. She just loved me. I would not have this life without my mother. Is this the only time? Has she only been my mother once? Thinking of the flow of countless lives, stretching back to beginningless time, for us to have this close connection. She must have done it before. She must have given herself completely for me before. And if once, then probably more than I can count. And Father, who also helped give me this body, take care of me, provide for me. Was it just life? He's probably cared for me before as well, more than once. Just imagine seeing the stream of lives of all the times my mother has been my mother, my father has been my father, my father's probably also been my mother. I bet some of my friends have been my mother. They have that kind of affection. I bet some of my enemies have been my mother, because usually those strong connections sometimes are the most painful when they turn sour. Even though the strangers I don't recognize, they don't come into my view so easily. I think of life after life after life, and all the ways relationships come and go into being. For sure, some of those strangers, they've been my mother more than once. In fact, I don't know there's anyone I can look at and say with great certainty, this one has never been my mother. It just doesn't sit right. Somehow I think we've been that close. The only reason I can't remember is the trauma of birth and death. I don't remember being born. I don't remember being in the womb. It's no surprise I don't remember lives before this. And so allowing the sea of people, my mothers of past lives in this life, my fathers of past lives in this life, the friends, the enemies, the strangers that have all been so close to me, they've probably been my mother. And then thinking right now in this moment, the seat that I'm sitting on, the shelter that I'm in, the clothes that I wear, my ability to hear this teaching, everything, countless beings are responsible for making all of this happen, providing for me, caring for me. Every single living being who has supported me and continues to support me, they all came into this world because of a mother. And so in this moment, seeing ourselves surrounded by all of our mothers of all of our lives, all of the mothers who are supporting me by means of everything I use and enjoy to sustain myself. They're all here. An ocean of mothers surrounding me, all supporting this 1 minute, this one time in my life. And imagine that they all have the faces of my mother of this life. Wanting to do something in return. May all these mothers have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all these mothers be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all these mothers attain a state of happiness that can never be touched by suffering, the freedom of liberation, the bliss of enlightenment. May all of us abide in the great equanimity, the spacious, limitless, boundless, unbiased mind of enlightenment. May I cause all beings to abide in this way. Please, Guru Chenrezig, grant me blessings to be able to do this. And then as we recite the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra, imagining that white light and nectar streams down from Chenrezig's heart, enters the crown of our head, touches our heart and blasts out through all the pores of our body, touching all of the ocean of mothers, my mothers, bringing them every blessing, every happiness, freeing them from suffering, and placing them in a state of joyous bliss. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 And all of our teachers absorb into Chenrezig. Chenrezig melts into a stream of white light, enters the crown of our head, and descends, becoming inseparable with our mind at the heart, a brilliant, bright drop of crystal light. I bow down to the body of him in whom the sacred precious mind is born. I take refuge in that source of joy, he who brings to happiness even those who harm them. And if we could just do the dedication prayer. Do you have them, Mary? There we go. Thank you. So again, just remembering that Guru Buddha, to attain that state, is to be active in the world as teachers to help our mothers who are helping us all the time. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Do you have the next one? May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the general one for all of our teachers. May all teachers teaching true paths to enlightenment in any time, in any place, have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and all our other teachers. May all their holy wishes be fulfilled. And then just sealing the dedication and all the merits that we've accumulated by listening to the teachings about precious bodhicitta. And just sealing it with the mind, recognizing that nothing exists the way that it appears. Nothing can be found when looked for, come up empty-handed. But that all actions have their effects because of the truth of dependent arising. And giving away all of these merits to all beings everywhere. So thank you very much. There's a little bit of homework on the page. Basically it's just doing this meditation a couple times, and especially doing the mindfulness awareness. Are you my mother? That's the homework for this week, and to read those pages in Rinpoche's little book, just on the 7-point cause and effect mind training. I think it's not that many pages, so I think we can all do it.